Hi, guys, and welcome to another 7 minute lecture. The invincibility of the Mongols. That's what we're discussing today. As all of you know, the 13th century, from a global history standpoint, was almost entirely a Mongolian century. To this day, even in the 21st century, the Mongolian Empire remains the largest contiguous empire to have ever existed. As in, even though subsequent empires like the British one, let's say, were bigger purely in terms of territory, that was broken up into smaller pieces all over the world. The Mongols, on the other hand, had one continuous, unbroken empire that spanned the whole of Asia except the subcontinent and small parts of Southeast and West Asia, right? And they also had, at the peak of their civilization, large parts of Europe, particularly Eastern Europe, and they pushed into Central Europe as well. When Genghis Khan first united the disparate Mongol tribes and became emperor, what was called the Great Khan in 1206, they were all in a tiny corner of Siberia somewhere. So, how did they end up conquering half the known world at that point? What were some of the key factors behind their seeming invincibility? That's what we're discussing today. I'm not going to go into the military tactics part. You can find that in a lot of different videos, and that's more like a 7 hour and not a 7 minute discussion. This video will instead focus on the sort of generalized aspects of Mongol society, which gave them an advantage. The first and often underrated factor was that, unlike many of the other steppe tribes, the Mongols didn't really have a lot of ethnic discrimination because Genghis Khan was himself the one who united so many of these tribes, and the system he implemented was one where most of them were willing to be a part of his army. And this in turn also made it a meritocracy. You couldn't get to high positions of power simply because of your birthright or simply because of your noble blood. In most cases, it was a question of your achievements and not your pedigree. So, this is why the Mongols were different from the other steppe tribes, and it's why they were able to rise well above the rest of them. But what made the Mongols so sort of invincible against the rest of the world? Military historians have given a number of reasons for this, so let me just list out two or three of what I personally consider to be the most important among these. The first is the horse. Most modern societies don't really comprehend how important the horse has been in shaping human history. In fact, you could argue that other than the mosquito or the rat or whatever, humans have shaped our history. Sorry, horses have shaped our history far more than most of us think. The horse was essentially the most vital piece of military technology that determined which nations were strong and which nations were weak. They could be used as cavalry, they could be used for mounted archery, like the Mongols were famous for. They could be used for scouting, to relay messages. They could be used for transporting supplies. And most importantly, on the battlefield itself, the speed and mobility that high quality horses gave you often allowed you to pursue tactics that could simply not be countered by the enemy unless they too had horses of the same quality. And here's where the Mongols had such a huge geographic gift given to them. They were not just the best horse warriors, they were the sort of the people who lived in the steppes region, and therefore they were the perfect society to raise high quality horses, because the entire steppe plain, if you look at a world map, is completely unobstructed. Horses need to run around a lot. You cannot grow large numbers of high quality horses in forested areas or uneven terrain. Even having lots of shrubs and bushes makes it impossible to raise armies of high quality horses. And this is why, even though many civilizations like the Indians tried for centuries to breed high quality horses, they never could. The terrain was too uneven and too forested to grow them in large numbers. So the Mongol tribes had the perfect terrain, the perfect homeland to raise huge amounts of high quality horses, which was a major determinant in warfare at that time, which meant also that one soldier in the Mongolian invading horde could typically have about 4 or 5 horses assigned to him. So he could always be mounted, even when some of the horses themselves needed to rest. If you compare that with most of the other Asian and European armies at the time, it was a privilege to have a horse. Only the upper classes, the noble elite classes and officers would even have a horse. So they couldn't even afford to give every person in the army one horse, let alone many. And the other big advantage the Mongols had was that as a nomadic tribe, there was no distinction between a civilian and a soldier or a civilian and a hunter. Every male in that society was expected to know how to ride a horse, how to shoot a bow, how to hunt animals, how to survive the wilderness, blah blah. So their entire male population were essentially trained soldiers from birth, while agrarian settled societies simply don't function that way. As you know, the average guy in a settled society would not be living the hunter gatherer lifestyle and was therefore simply not as well equipped and well bred for war as every nomadic tribesman was. And we see this trend recurring in history over and over again, where even these large, fortified, technologically advanced empires crumble when invaded by these bloodthirsty nomadic armies. It's like a highly trained fencer trying to go up against a tiger or a lion. You're not bridging that gap. And this gave the Mongols two final advantages that I'll touch on: logistics and terror. Logistics, because each Mongol warrior would just bring his supplies with him. You didn't need a supply caravan for your army. You didn't have to worry about your supply lines being cut off by the enemy. You would come with your own cattle and tents, for example. So the way in which most military campaigns are just crippled by logistical demands never actually hampered the Mongols in any way. And the final advantage they had was terror, because they were genuinely savage in comparison to the settled nations of the time. There was a psychological factor which is still infamous to this day. I mean, let's be honest. You and I are almost a millennium removed from the Mongol heyday, and yet even you and I have heard of how scary and brutal and savage these horseback nomads were. And so in many cases, the Mongols didn't even have to fight. The cities and the kingdoms they invaded simply capitulated at the very sight of them. So to quickly paraphrase this entire video, the 5 basic reasons for Mongolian invincibility were these. 1. The meritocratic system adopted by the Mongols for their army without ethnic discrimination. Number 2, their ability to breed large numbers of high quality horses thanks to the huge terrain that they had at their disposal. 3. The fact that all Mongol men, like other nomadic tribes, were fighters and hunters from birth, rather than simply having a professional class of soldiers and mercenaries. 4. The self-sufficiency of each Mongol, to the point where logistics did not hamper their choices in any way. And 5, the terror they inspired in settled agrarian societies that simply could not comprehend or counter the natural savagery of these invading hordes. If you like content like this, please don't forget to share and subscribe. Thank you, take care, and I'll see you soon.